So your muscular system supports the functions of your skeletal system, and we're going to talk through your muscles and ultimately in this one really focus on how a muscle contracts, and that's the sliding filament theory. So I've augmented the videos and linked some videos that summarize the sliding filament theory, but that's really what we're going to focus on with muscles. So the basic function of your muscles is to convert energy into movements or convert ATP and the energy in the ATP molecule into physical movement in your body. Your muscles help provide stability. They help us communicate. You can think of that with your facial muscles or your body language. And basically, muscles also control body openings. We're talking about voluntary and involuntary muscles in your muscular system. Other key things about your muscles is that they provide about 85% of the heat of your body. You're an endothermic organism, which means that your body requires homeostasis and it requires a specific target set body temperature. And you need it because basically it's the optimal conditions for the enzymes in your body. And when enzymes function properly, so does your metabolism. And so really it's a key function of your muscles because it's not just movement that ATP is being converted into, but also heat. And so that key process is important in our bodies. And I know when I'm feeling cold from sitting at my desk for too long, I'm prone to stoking the fire. But what I should do is get up and bustle around the house for a little bit so that I bring my body back up to warm. The other thing here is that bones attach to muscles with tendons. Ligaments, as a reminder, go bone to bone. And so I think of the Achilles tendon here in the lower part of your leg there as a reminder to keep the ligaments and tendons straight. The other thing about the muscles is that they can only actively shorten and contract. They don't actively get longer. So they can shorten, contract, or they can relax. And those are the only two options. And so the way your body is set up is that muscles work in antagonistic pairs. And so as an example here, you have your bicep and your tricep. Well, one contracts while the other relaxes. And then to reverse the movement of your forearm, then you would have the other one contract and the other one relax. And so it's this partnership, if you will, in your muscular system that we call antagonistic pairs because muscles can only actively shorten. And so that's what we're talking about here. There is no active lengthening. It's either contract or relax. And that's what is basically the key component that antagonistic pairs are trying to talk about. How muscles contract and this idea of the sliding filament theory is where we're going. So we need a little bit of anatomy to get things sorted out here. So in a muscle, you would find many bundles of muscle fibers or muscle cells running parallel to each other. We're going to focus on skeletal muscle because it's the easiest one to sort of visualize, but as a reminder, skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle all work with the sliding filament theory. So in a muscle fiber or a muscle cell, they're long cylindrical cells. You might remember that from your chapter 25, and the nuclei are on the periphery or the outside of these long cells. Most of the volume is myofibrils, which are organelles of bundles of overlapping filaments. And so you can have the thick filament, myosin, and the thin filament, actin. It's the arrangement of these little filaments, these contractile proteins, as they're sometimes called, that makes skeletal muscle look striated or striped. And so even though you have no striations in your smooth muscle, it's still the actions of this actin and myosin that cause the contraction of muscle. So like I said, we're going to focus on skeletal muscle because it's the easiest to help conceptualize the sliding filament theory. If we understand that we have myosin and actin, and the way I remember the thick filaments, mayonnaise is thick, and that's not the word mayonnaise, I know that, but that's the way I remember it. And if you're active, you're probably thin, which is a terrible memory device, but honestly, those are the ways I remember myosin and actin and which is which. If we were to take a look at the arrangement of these, we have myosin anchored in the middle, and then we have actin overlapping that bound to another part of our what we call a sarcomere. And so the sarcomere, I'm going to show you a better picture than this one in just a minute. The sarcomere is a repeating group of thick and thin filaments, and it is the contractile unit. It's the fundamental unit of muscle contraction. So as we learn about how a muscle contracts, it's the sarcomere that we're going to focus on. So we have muscles with muscle fibers, and these single muscle fibers are made up of cells, and the nuclei are on the periphery, and these would be the myofibrils, or those myosin and actin microfilaments. And so here we have, like I'd said, the myosin in the middle. If you think of it that way, that's the thick filament, and the actin beside, which is the thin filament. And so if you were to take a look at where the center line of the actin are to the center line of the next actin, that is called a sarcomere. And what we're going to talk about is this sarcomere as the fundamental unit of muscle contraction. So as we talk about the sliding filament theory, it's the sarcomere that is going to be the thing that we are talking about. So the sliding filament model, or the sliding filament theory, explains muscle contraction. Basically, a sarcomere, as we just saw in the picture above, is what we're talking about shortening. And so from Z line to Z line is going to come closer together. The sarcomere is going to get shorter. It's a lot easier for the animations in the videos to illustrate this. So after you listen through this video, it might be worth watching those animations to get a better uh, animated display of what we're talking about here. So the sarcomere contracts or shortens when the thin filaments slide across the thick filaments. And so they overlap each other. They sort of slide together like your fingers could. And that's what shortens the sarcomere. So again, thick filament myosin, thin filament actin, and the contraction of a muscle shortens the sarcomere without changing the lengths of those individual filaments. And so like your fingers sliding past each other, your fingers don't get shorter, but maybe your hands do get closer together. When the muscle is fully contracted, the thin filaments overlap the middle of the sarcomere. And basically, whole muscles can shorten up to 35% of their resting length if all the sarcomeres were to contract. That's maximum contraction, so probably not you raising your forearm up and lowering down like you were maybe illustrating in that antagonistic muscles. Thing. So this is, again, trying to illustrate what's happened. So this would be a regular or relaxed muscle illustrating the sarcomere with its actin and its myosin overlapping, but not as overlapped as when the sarcomere is contracted. So a fully contracted muscle, you can see how much overlapping there is between the actin and the myosin. If you take a look at the overall length of the pink and the blue bands here, the actin and the myosin are not any shorter than they were in the relaxed state, but the sarcomere is shorter. So this is the sliding filament model. Basically, the videos do have a little more information. I like to sort of illustrate this in some key sort of terms, if you will. And basically, yeah, this is the slide that helps me understand or explain, hopefully, the sliding filament model. So to start, there's a nerve cell that releases a neurotransmitter and causes the the sarcoplasmic reticulum or the muscle cell to release a calcium ion. This is basically the thing that's going to help expose the active sites on the actin. So the actin has some guarding molecules that the calcium basically goes in and distracts. In the crash course, he uses a middle school dance analogy, and so the calcium would be the chaperones. I have a kid in middle school, and I don't know if I'm comfortable with the middle school dance analogy, but if that's something that helps you understand it, then go for it. And so here we have the calcium distracting the chaperones so this sliding filament model can actually work. So that's what's going to start. It's going to start, and over on this side is all about the actin. Over on this side is all about the myosin. And so I've kind of edited this slide so that you have these kind of pieces of information about the two different filaments here. So once the chaperones are distracted and the actin now has the active binding sites available, we go over to talk about what's happening with the myosin. And the myosin has an active head on it. So this is a myosin head. And what happens is that an ATP molecule is going to bind to the head. So the ATP comes in contact with the myosin head here. That is going to, when the ATP is converted to ADP, is going to put some energy into the myosin head that changes the position of that protein. So it basically raises the head of this little myosin head, and it cocks the head of the myosin. That's what it says in the textbook. So the energy is now in the myosin and it's extended in its form. After we have that extension in the myosin head, the high energy configuration as it says in the slide, and we had the chaperones distracted, we now have the active binding sites of the actin available for the myosin to form a cross bridge with. And so this is literally a bonding between the myosin and the actin. So we have contact between the two filaments in our muscle cells. After that, we have the energy is spent, and the energy leaves and causes the myosin head to move back to its original position. Well, it's still attached to that actin microfilament. And so basically this is what draws the actin over top of the myosin. This causes the power stroke, or this is how the two filaments overlap. They're drawn over top of each other, sliding the thin filament toward the center of the sarcomere. And this is what's shortening the muscle. This is going to happen in like repetition and kind of going from 4 to 2, so long as there is a nerve cell stimulation. If the nerve stops firing, so the muscle stimulation stops because there's no more nerve impulse, calcium is taken back up into the muscle, blocking, being a chaperone that it is, and no cross bridges are possible. An interesting thing here is to notice, and I'm just going to switch colors, the role of ATP. So ATP we've always talked about as energy. You don't technically need the ATP for the muscle to contract. You need it to contract, but ultimately you need another ATP molecule to come in and bind to this head so that it relaxes. Because at this point, your muscle is contracted. To go back up to the beginning, I'm going to make a mess of the slide here. To go back up to the beginning for the muscle to stop contracting, you would need more energy. And so this is the explanation of how rigor mortis sets in. If you don't have live cells creating more ATP, there's no more ATP being generated to get those myosin heads to disengage from those actin filaments. And that's why in death, the state of your muscles is contracted, which is what rigor mortis is. In the crash course video, there's more of an explanation for that if you want to check that out. There's a little bit more on a more positive topic rather than death and rigor mortis, in that muscle cells, energy, and exercise are often something that we are interested in. And so we do need, like I said, that ATP for the energy, or for the muscles to return to their relaxed state. And so here we've got that little bit written in the notes about what I was just talking about. We know that we can have aerobic respiration or anaerobic respiration. This is back to chapter 6. And so your cells can generate ATP in either of these ways. And so basically that's what we're talking about, the ATP in either of these cases for those our understanding of the sliding filament theory. Muscles have multiple mitochondria because they do require so much ATP, and they have a special hemoglobin molecule in them called myoglobin. And myoglobin's key job is to really specialize in delivering oxygen. Other kind of applications of this or extensions, again, is more dealing with kind of health and wellness as opposed to injury or death, as I was just talking about. We understand that muscle burn or that lactic acid formation, we've talked about that with that anaerobic respiration back to chapter 6. The soreness from the next day is due to muscle damage. And so that lactic acid does expose muscles to damage. and that's why you feel sore. Basically, in muscles, that healing process is constructing new muscles, and that's how you build muscles, is through stressing them, much like you did build bone mass through stressing your bones with weight-bearing activity. So exercise routinely changes the composition of muscle fibers. We all have experienced that. I know at the beginning of the school year, after an active summer, I can run up the stairs no problem. By about April, when I'm getting exhausted, um, running up the stairs from the bottom floor of the college to the third floor, I'm a little bit more winded, and so we see this in ourselves and understand. And basically, the more you do, the more your muscles are going to be fit to do the jobs that they're supposed to do. So that rolls out the end of our chapter 33 video, and really the last system of the body that we're studying in this course.